Uh, so thank you everyone for the, and particularly Rachel, for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. Uh, I managed to grab a beer glass. Unfortunately, you'll all be drinking out of plastic. And that's a bit of a shame. And I also found a beer. So rather than start dry, what I was going to talk about today is about what we look for when we judge beer. So we have beer awards in every state in Australia every year. The Perth Beer Awards are run under the auspices of the Royal Agricultural Society, as they are in most states, I think. So actually getting those beer awards together, we're talking about several hundred beers that need to be tasted by a limited number of judges over 2 days, usually a Sunday and a Monday. And there's quite a bit involved just in the logistics of getting the beers delivered to the showgrounds in time. Anyone that's ever worked with a brewer will understand that they're not very good on timing. We tend to leave things to the last minute quite often. So one of the things I thought I'd do is just quickly run through, before we taste Nigel's beers, I'll give you the ammunition to be able to mark him down. Not that I was going to take the mickey out of him. So one of the first things we look at is appearance. So beers are judged across 5 criteria. And the first one is appearance, and there's 3 points for it. The second one is aroma, and there's 5 points for it. Then there's taste, six points. Technical quality, 3 points. And finally, trueness to style, 3 points. So all up, it's 20 points. And if you lose a point, if your beer loses a point in each of those categories, you're already down to a bronze medal. You only need to lose another 1 mark, I think, and you don't score a medal at all. So it can be very disappointing for brewers, particularly their gentle egos. They tend to get bruised a lot when their beers don't get a medal, but it is quite tough to get a medal when judges are getting served maybe a couple of hundred beers in a day. Or not quite that many, but a lot. So for example, what we're looking for when we first pour a beer is the appearance, and particularly what we're looking at is the quality of the foam. So does it form a head? And the brewer works quite hard to make sure it does. There are some reasons why a lot of craft beers perhaps don't form as much head as you might like. So I think Nigel's already said that with one of his beers got corn in it. Yeah, so it doesn't form very good head. But some of the craft beers that are adding particular flavour components, so doing anything with coconut, for example, the fats, the oils from the coconut will flatten the beer pretty quickly. So there's a few techniques you have to use to maintain the head on the beer. I'm sure they're going to get you a beer shortly, so you'll have to excuse me while I partake. It's part of the demonstration. Enjoy. So, sorry, I'm just going to take we're just going to look at the rest of the appearance. Sorry. So foam's the first part. Then clarity. So a lot of beers these days aren't clear. This is one of Ferrell's beers, Warhog. It's probably not allowed to be here because this is a gauge stadium, but it's a cloudy beer, and a lot of craft beers these days are made cloudy. Some of that in the early days was because craft brewers couldn't afford the filtration equipment to actually manage to produce clear beers all the time, or bright beers. So for anyone of a reasonable age, you'll remember all the lager beers, all the beer available in Australia used to be lagers, and they all were crystal clear and bright. In fact, as a young brewer, if you produced a beer into a bright beer tank that didn't meet specification for its brightness, then you got hauled over the coals very quickly. So this is meant to be cloudy, and that's not yeast, by the way. That is deliberately derived from the nature of the malts we put in, so malted barley, malted wheat, and the way we brew the beer. It's designed to have what we call a protein haze rather than just having yeast in it. So on appearance, this would probably score reasonably well, 3 points. And then we go to aroma. And what I want you to do when you're doing Nigel's beer is to look for the obvious things, if you like. So as beer judges, it's very easy to be critical. Brewers are quite critical of beers, of other people's beers, and even of their own beers. So what they're looking for initially is faults. So you can have brewing faults that are caused by poor fermentation, poor yeast health, and a range of other things, poor nutrients for yeast growth. So that's initially what they're looking for, but what we're also looking for then is the aromas that we get from either the malts that are being used. So if you've got a beer that's it's malt forward, then you might get some biscuity characters from specialty malts that are used in producing the beer. If it's hop forward, and that's most of the craft beers that are being produced today, there's a lot of hop character. They just continue to add more and more aroma hops to drive up the hop character on the nose. So you'll get distinct characters of, could be citrus, you could get more earthy characters like the traditional English beers, but the American style beers are very citrusy, fruity, and aromatic from that perspective. So finally after having a look at its appearance and aroma and judging it, and you can see that for most judges, if 5 points is available for aroma, it'd be very easy to go, well, I think the next beer might be more aromatic. I'll just mark this one down, which isn't really the way you should approach it. You should approach each beer as if it's a medal-winning beer, and your reasons for marking it down are legitimately because it doesn't meet the requirements of that beer style or does have a flavour fault or an aroma that shows fermentation faults. So, 5 points for aroma, 6 points for taste. Oh yes, that's 6 points. So what we're looking for on flavour is similar to aroma. We're looking for faults that may occur, but we're looking for some of the flavour characteristics that are determined by the style. So if you're producing a hazy NEPA beer, then the flavour characteristics are going to be quite different to a traditional ale, traditional English ale, a wheat beer, or perhaps an Australian style lager. So you're tasting not for your own preferences, you're tasting for the flavour characteristics that you should see in a beer in that style. So 6 points for taste. Technical quality, again, is around how the beer is structured, its balance, whether balance is probably the primary one. Certainly if there's any technical faults, that would mark it down immediately. And then finally we finally get to trueness to style. Now this can be quite complex because there's an enormous number of styles and subcategories in each style. So there's 3 or 4 different types of wheat beers. There's dozens of different types of IPAs, India Pale Ales. So the onus on the judge is to make sure that they're in their own tasting and their own work, that they're actually sampling a lot of different types of beer, different styles of beer, and different competitors. So if we were just to sit at Feral drinking Feral beers all day, we'd have a very high opinion of them, but they may not compete well when we go out and sample other people's beers. And that's one of the problems for all brewers, is getting the time to go out and sample other beers and a broad range of beers. To help with that process, there is a manual for beer styles that's updated every year. It comes out of the American system, and it lists the tasting notes, the technical notes, the specifications for all the recognised beer styles. So you have that available on the table, and you can quickly go through and refresh your memory about whether some characteristic should be present in this beer or not. Should it be subtle flavour, or should it be a prominent flavour? So that's the final score out of 3 for technical. The process itself is a bit similar to what you're doing today. We'll have a table with a team, with a table captain, and you might have 5 or 6 judges, and in the background they're serving up the beers for a particular style and class. So it might be Australian Pale Ale style or English Pale Ale style, and they'll bring out a flight, what they call a flight of beers that fit into that category. They'll bring them out to the table, so each person on the table, each judge on the table, judges those beers in their own time, quite quickly, left to right, judges them for appearance, aroma, taste, technical, and style. And then they will finish that flight, might be half a dozen beers or so, and they will record that data. They'll discuss it and record that data. Now, the reason it's discussed is to ensure that there's some common ground amongst all the judges. We all taste things differently. We all have different capacities as far as our olfactory bulb goes and our perception of particular flavours. A good example is diacetyl. Diacetyl is butterscotch sort of character that you sometimes get in beer, and it is a fault in just about every beer style, bar a couple of dark beer styles. That comes from, it's a fermentation fault that comes from the brewer removing his yeast prior to it getting the opportunity to metabolise diacetyl compound. So if that's present, then that can be a problem for the brewer. But the problem with diacetyl from a broad spectrum of people is that some of the people in this room wouldn't be able to taste diacetyl. There's a good chance there's one or two that may not be able to taste it or recognise it, smell it, and there'll be some people in this room that are very sensitive to it. The trick for brewers is to understand where you sit on that spectrum in relation to a whole range of flavours. So I'll be honest with you, I don't judge anymore. I used to be judging at various places, Melbourne, Perth. I was chief judge at Perth a couple of times. But I don't do it anymore because I recognise that my palate has deteriorated. More my ability to detect certain aromas. Why that is, I don't know, but it's deteriorated over time. That happens with age. So it's important for brewers to recognise what they're good at and what they're not good at. I've actually had a couple of students that during their beer taste training discovered that they couldn't taste diacetyl, which meant that they could never release their own beer. So they always had to have someone else taste their beer before they released it to the public. Because if you're blind to it, you're blind to it. It's quite surprising to be told that there's something in that beer and you could swear black and blue that you can't smell it, you don't know it's there. Alrighty, so that's it for me. I won't hold you up from getting a beer any longer. Are there any questions anyone wants to ask? Yes.
Thanks, Hugh. That was fascinating. I just wanted to ask, you go into any half-decent bottle shop and you will see beers that have all sorts of ingredients, especially the ones with the lactose in them.
Yep.
How do you benchmark those beers? How do you actually judge a Vegemite, strawberry, bloody soda pop beer?
Yeah, that's tricky. There are new styles being added pretty much all the time. But those beers typically have an underlying style to them. So in the beer category, it might be a wheat beer with added fruit. So the base beer should have the characteristics of a wheat beer, for example, and the brewer needs to identify what fruit they've used. So the beer judges at the table don't actually get a lot of information. What they do know is the style, and there'll be certain information that the stewards will give them that beer 6, for example, is it's come out under a wheat category with wheat with fruit, and they'll be told beer 6 is with strawberry or raspberry. So it does become very difficult. After all, it's up to every individual. The trick for brewers, I suppose, is to recognise that it's not about what they like and what they don't like. So I personally don't have I don't like lactose beers. However, when they're done well, they can be quite good beers, but it's not something I would drink on a regular basis. So it's style notes with the added information about what fruit's been added and how that might impact on the beer. So it's up to the beer judge to understand how that should impact on the beer and use the beer notes, the beer style guidelines, to refresh his memory about what he should be tasting.
Yep.
That's about as close as I can get. Because, beer, often you'll smell something and go, oh, that's awful, but you still have to judge it. Unless it's a fault, and that's where beer judges won't spend any time on a beer with a fault. They just mark it down. So a lager, a Pilsner with an Australian lager with diacetyl in it, you wouldn't even bother doing the rest. You just mark it down.
Yep.
Sorry, there was another question. Behind you? Oh.
In your opinion, what's the best beer in the world?
The one you're drinking at the time. Actually, no, I think the way it goes is the one you're about to drink next.
And is low-carb beer really low-carb?
Relatively speaking, yes. So it is. They're designed to be, by adding an enzyme, you can break down some of the complex carbohydrates so that they can be metabolized. So they tend to be a little bit thinner in character, but they are about 20%, I think some would say 30% less in carbohydrate. But carbohydrate in the scheme of things isn't really the issue. It's the alcohol. So a low carbohydrate beer that's still 5% alcohol is, you're still getting the energy from the alcohol. You've still got to blow that off somehow. I think people that do well, that go into low carb beers and lose weight, it's not been necessarily because of the low carb beer. It's because they've made a conscious decision about watching what they drink and eat and what they're intaking, and so they probably are drinking less as well, and they've probably changed some other aspects of their lifestyle. I think if you drink as much low carb beer as you do full strength beer, then you probably won't notice a lot of difference other than in flavour.
All right, last question.
Yeah, so with the results from the judging, does that get fed back through to the brewers to improve their blends?
Yeah. Sorry. And that can be a bone of contention as well. So at the end of the process, the tasting notes that the table captain has put into the computer, they'll get sent to the brewer. And sometimes they can cause problems because a judge will say, a hint of diacetyl. And of course the brewer goes, who have they got on that judging panel? What an idiot. It hasn't got diacetyl in it. So it can cause some problems, but yes, they do get feedback. And I think after your initial shock and the bruised ego, brewers generally sit down and say, well, this is across the table. This is 6 people or 5 people saying the same thing. Then there might be something in it. And yes, brewers tend to try and improve. And the beer judges, to their credit, try and spend the time to say, you could have a problem with, and it might be your CIP, your cleaning, or your boil in your kettle, that sort of thing.
All right. Quick one.
I don't have a drinking problem, no.
Okay.
Sorry, say again?
How many craft beers are there?
Oh, craft beers? No idea. Craft breweries, what are we up to, about 70?
Yeah, probably.
About 70? Yeah, and when I came to WA in '97, Emu Bitter was my beer. I loved it, but it's changed a lot since then. Look, the craft brewers are putting out new beers all the time, and one of the things that has changed across the industry is that hoteliers and people that run bars generally aren't freeing up their taps to just anyone. So they might have one spare tap or one free tap that isn't part of their reward program with Lion or with CUB, and they'll go, well, what have you got for me? What's the latest flavour? And yes, it might be a wheat beer with strawberries in it, and they'll put it on for a month. And then next month it'll be something else from some other craft brewer. So it's hard yakka. It's easy, sorry, it's not easy making beer, but but it's the easier part of the process. Making beer and getting it on tap and holding a tap point is really tough, and COVID didn't help a lot. Coming out of COVID, actually, it did help craft brewers in Western Australia, because I think Lion was hacked and couldn't get access to their normal ordering system, and I think CUB couldn't get beer across to Western Australia. So we were getting calls, a lot of craft brewers were getting calls from publicans that hadn't taken our beer before, saying, what have you got? So yeah, it's good.
All right. Thanks, Hugh.
No problem.
And thanks, Nigel, for enlightening us on what makes a good beer. I think now I've actually got a valid excuse for my wife when I go to the pub. I'm going into training for when there's a vacancy at the Royal Show Beer Judging Contest. So, anyway, it's been torture watching Hugh hold that beer, swill it, drink it. So I think it's about time that we actually were able to sample some for ourselves. But before we do, just on behalf of GIWA, we appreciate everyone that's joined us today, both in the room and virtually. And we hope that you've received plenty of good content from all the presenters today. And finally, I'd just like everyone to put their hands together and congratulate the GIWA staff. So to Peter, Rachel, Miller, who is online, Bronwyn and Saracen. I hope I've got that right. Thank you very much for once again putting on a fantastic event. It is really a pleasure working with you guys, so thank you very much.